Hello, Wolverine's Elevated students. In today's video, we are going to have a mini lesson and a tutorial on some of the key details you need to pay attention to while emailing a supervisor or a professor. Now, being a college student means that you will have to email multiple people during your time of being a college student. Also, being part of Wolverine's Elevated means that at times you might have to email a supervisor. All of these rules that we'll discuss today are helpful even after you graduate from Wolverine's Elevated and UVU, and they can be taken on with you to a job or really anywhere that you might go afterwards, but also while you are in college, these are really helpful to help your writing be more professional, concise, and really just put together. So, we're going to go over the steps and the details you need to pay attention to when you are emailing a supervisor or a professor. So, to begin, let's talk about the purpose. Now, when you're writing an email to anyone, you need to consider the reasoning or the purpose for your email. So, when you begin writing your email or just composing an email, you want to make sure that you have the reasoning or the purpose for your email in your head and that you know what you are trying to convey to your professor. This is a direct quote from an article on Indeed, but it says, "Before writing your email, identify the reason that you're contacting your supervisor. This can keep you on track while crafting your email and ensure that you include all relevant information." Now, with that, here are some ways that you can stay on topic. You can make a checklist of all that you want to say before beginning to really write your email. You could call this a draft. So you could just write down some notes on a piece of paper or on the Notes app on your computer or phone of just kind of the main things that you want to mention in your email. This is important when, say, your email is a little longer, or maybe you have multiple questions asked, or just multiple statements that you need to tell your supervisor or your professor that you are emailing. In addition to making a checklist, another way you can stay on topic is to find the details beforehand. Now, there's not a lot of times where you would necessarily need to do research before sending an email because most of the time in college, you just maybe need to ask your professor about a question for an assignment or maybe ask for an extension. But even with that, there's a little bit of research that goes into it. You need to know what the assignment is about, when it's due, so that way, if you were asking for an extension, you could include in your email when it's due, and you could ask if instead of being due on that day for you, you could have it due maybe a couple of days later. So that would also be considered research, just knowing what the assignment is about, when it's due, those type of details. You can also write the subject line first, and that can help you stay on topic. And we'll talk more about the subject line in just a minute here. And lastly, you need to decide what information is most important to say. And when you figure out what information is most important to say, you want to put this at the beginning of your email. We know that professors and even just you get busy, and professors don't always have the time to read maybe every single word in your email, and that goes for supervisors too. Now, chances are they probably will read your whole email, but it's important to make the most important things that you want to say to your professor at the beginning. So that way your message gets across and it's clear and your professor knows exactly what you're talking about. Now, with putting all that important information at the beginning, it also goes into this next point: be detailed and give only relevant information. So, for example, if you want to request a deadline change for a project, so maybe you're asking for an extension on an assignment, you want to make sure that you include the previous deadline, the name of the project, and the new requested deadline and the reason for the change. Now, that's kind of wordy, but essentially, if you were asking for an extension on an assignment, you would want to include when it's due, so the previous deadline, what the project name is, so the name of the assignment, and then what deadline or what new due date you want that assignment to be due on. So typically, when you're writing an email like this, you should have a certain day in mind that you want to get your assignment done. So that way you don't push it back too far. Plus, your professors will probably want you to have it in by a certain time so that way you can move on to the next topic of that course. And then lastly, you definitely want to include a reason for the change. Now, sometimes it can just be as simple as there was a lot of reading and you just didn't have enough time to complete all the reading in order to complete that assignment. But sometimes the reason is bigger. Maybe you had something happen, maybe family life or just personal, and you just didn't have enough time to complete that assignment. You just want to make sure that you give a reason for the change. So that way, your professors don't just think that you're asking for an extension because maybe you don't want to do it. The more specific and detailed you can be, the more likely your professors will understand what you're asking and in return will accept your proposal. Now, we talked about some of the main details to pay attention to when writing an email, and one of those was the subject line. Now, the subject line in an email is this right here. You have the two, so that was who you would be writing it to. So, say if it was professor or supervisor, you would put in their name right there. Then you have the subject line, and this is where you want to put in what your email is talking about. So, the subject line of your email should be brief and summarize the reason for your message. There are many reasons why your subject should be specific. And one of those reasons is that your professor can relocate that email if there's ever a confusion about an assignment or maybe a question you ask them in this email. That way, they can quickly relocate it again. And it's not going to be a hassle for you to have to find the email to show it to them, or it's not going to be a hassle for them to have to try and find it. So that's why your subject line should just be brief and summarize the reason for your message. Here are a couple of examples of possible subject lines. So it could be the name of a project or task. So, say you had to do a reading for a chapter in your textbook, and maybe the assignment name was just read chapter 12 of textbook. You could have that as a subject line, chapter 12 of textbook. That way, before your professors even read what your email is about, they know you're going to be talking about chapter 12 of your textbook. So, as you can see with that, you're being brief, but you're also quickly summarizing the reason for your message. Next example, it could be a question on a certain topic. So depending on what class you're trying to send your professor an email to, maybe the topic is self-determination and the assignment has something to do about advocacy. So your question could be, or your subject line could be, question on advocacy. That way, before your professor even reads your email, they know you're going to be talking about advocacy and that you have a question about it. Other examples are request for time off. This would be something more in a job type of position. So if you needed to ask for time off, that would be a good subject line. You can't really ask for time off necessarily in school for a professor. They probably wouldn't be able to give that to you, but you could ask for an extension request, which is the next subject line, the example. Extension request for assignment name. So, again, if the assignment name was chapter 12 of textbook, you could say extension request for chapter 12 of textbook. Again, you're being brief, but you're summarizing the reason for your email. And then lastly would be just like a thank you email. It could just be a thank you. Thank you for blank. Maybe you had a one on one meeting with them about an assignment and you just want to thank them for their time. So that way in the future, they'll want to meet with you again because you gain something from having that meeting with them, but that's just one example. So, thank you for meeting with me. That would be an example of a subject line. Now, when you're drafting an email, the subject line and the to portion are the two first things that you want to fill in. Once you have those both filled in, then we go on to the greeting. It's important when you're writing an email to a supervisor that you are appropriate for the given situation. So, by this, I mean you want to make sure you're professional, especially when emailing a professor or a supervisor. So, an example, let's say that we were emailing Willie the Wolverine, our mascot. These would be some example email greetings. Mr. Willie, comma, hello Professor Willie, comma, hi Willie, good afternoon Willie. Those are all examples of greetings. So there's not really any context there, but you're just addressing them appropriately And that's how you remain professional in this type of setting. Now, once you have your subject line and your greeting, now you want to state your reason for emailing them. By opening with this content, it helps keep the email clear and quick for your professor or supervisor to read. Now, we talked about how professors don't always have time necessarily to read every single word in your email. They might just have to quickly skim it and then respond to you. So, by opening up your email with your reasoning for emailing them, it helps them kind of guide through the rest of your email. An example of an opening sentence would be, I am emailing you today to thank you for blank. So that kind of goes hand in hand with that example subject line of thank you for blank. So I am emailing you today to thank you for meeting with me, whatever the reason may be. Another example is, I am reaching out today to confirm that name of task was completed on date and time. So, this would be a good opening sentence if you had previously asked for an extension on an assignment and then you got it in by your new due date that you had agreed upon with your professor. So, an example would be, I'm reaching out to you to confirm that chapter 12 of the textbook was completed on June 9th. That would be your quick opening statement. Your professor knows now what you're talking about and can understand your reasoning for this email. The next example is, I was wondering about the possibility of an extension for the name of the assignment or project from original deadline to new deadline. So this would kind of come before that second example. So it could be, I was wondering about the possibility of an extension for the chapter 12 textbook assignment from June 1st to June 9th. Dates obviously will change depending on what the assignment is and when you're doing it. But that's just an example. But as you can see there, you're being specific and you're stating your reason for the email right from the get go. So once you have stated your reasoning for the email, if you need to do further explanation, this is when you would do it. I would probably call this the body of the email. So you're providing your explanation if you need to give an explanation. So in this, there's not really a guide to it because it would be very specific to what you're emailing your professor about. But any additional notes or comments that you need to give in response to that first sentence, the stating your reason, this is where you would provide that explanation. If you need help with providing this additional explanation, you can for sure reach out to a peer mentor and they can help you scribe an email so that way you feel you get in all the content you need if you need support with that. Next, we'll talk about list actions you need your supervisor to complete. Now, this isn't always necessary, but in the case where, say, you needed an extension on an assignment, you want to explain to your supervisor or your professor their role in this change or why you are emailing them specifically. So, if you were asking for an extension, you would maybe want to ask a professor to change the due date on Canvas. Now, that's not saying they're necessarily going to do that, but you could ask it or say something like, I greatly appreciate if you would change the due date on Canvas, something like that. So if there's actions that your supervisor or your professor needs to take, it's important that you list those in your email because otherwise your professor won't know necessarily what you need them to do if you don't tell them what you need to do. So it's really just about like using our words and explaining to your professor or supervisor their role in this situation. Now, coming to a close of your email, let's talk about adding a closing and a signature. So, an example ending to your email could be something like, thank you for your time in reviewing this email. Please let me know if you have any questions. You can reach out to me with further questions or for more information. Those are examples. So, you're just kind of now thanking and maybe just saying, if you have any other questions, please let me know. Those are the typical closing parts of an email, making it all now come together and thanking your professor or supervisor. Now, signatures are also important, just like how greetings are important, because now you're stating right who you are and again, kind of thanking them or just bidding a farewell. So, example signatures could be sincerely Willie the Wolverine. Obviously, use your own name. Thanks again, best regards. You can definitely choose your own signature, whatever makes sense to you. Maybe for me, my main one would be best regards, instead of sincerely. So you can totally play around with this a little bit if you're just getting more used to writing emails and putting in your signature. Just kind of play around, and there's no right way to do a signature necessarily, but something that's just kind of bidding a farewell is appropriate. Now, with your signature, you also want to include your pronouns. Now, this is something that you're going to discuss with Morgan, and possibly you already have, depending on the classes you've taken at this point. And possibly you already know your pronouns and you use them all the time. It doesn't really matter what point you are with your pronouns. So, example of pronouns are she, her, he, him, they, them. There's multiple different pronouns other than these three that are listed here. So, it just depends on who you are and how you go by. This is something that's also important when bidding farewell. So that way, when a professor or a supervisor is responding to you, they know how to address you. So for me personally, I go by she, her. So if a professor was emailing me back, they would know the appropriate terms and vocabulary to address me by. So now that you have written your whole email at this point, you want to do a checklist. So this is a checklist to look at before you send your email. So, some points just to kind of check off. Is it concise and to the point? We've talked about that a lot. So, you can ask yourself these kind of questions. Did you repeat yourself? If you did, consider deleting your repeats. Did you state your reason for the email? If not, go back and add it. So, look at your email again before sending it. Is it concise? Is it to the point? If it is, you can check that off. The next check you would want to look at is, did you use your school/work email? If you use your personal email, you want to copy that content and send it through your professional email instead of your personal email. This is especially important when sending an email for school or for work. If you want further information on Outlook at UVU, you can click the video up above in the right hand corner. Next point to check off is it easy to understand? Look at your writing. If you read it, would you be able to understand what you were saying? You definitely want to go back through and just kind of check those little things, your vocabulary, the terms you use, and really just make sure that your sentences look good and concise. And lastly, kind of going along with, is it easy to understand? Did you proofread it? You didn't proofread it, you want to make sure that you look at your grammar, your punctuation, and your vocabulary. Make sure that that's all appropriate. A little tip here is you could use grammarly.com. There's a couple of different platforms you could use to check your grammar or punctuation. If you go to grammarly.com, you could paste in your email and they might give you suggestions on edits you can make to make it more clear and concise for the person you are sending your email to. Now, we've talked about a lot today in this video, but let's kind of look at a couple of examples. This email template is going to be available to you, but it essentially is just a whole bunch of templates for different situations. So, if you're running late to a meeting, there's a template in here about that. If you are wanting to contact a job supervisor about an upcoming job shadow, there's an example in there for that. We can kind of look at an example here up close. So, this is if you are running late to a meeting. Here's a kind of template that you could use. Now, you're definitely going to need to edit it in order for all the information to be appropriate to what you are saying in this email. But this is just a template that you could kind of copy and paste and then go in and edit it afterwards. Pay attention really to the edit part. You can't just copy this template and send it directly. You need to edit it before sending it off. So, example, hi, and then you would want to put in your name. I apologize for the inconvenience, but I am running late to our meeting. I should be there by time. So you want to make sure you put in an estimated time of when you think you're going to be there. So delete the parentheses and the time part, and in there you would want to type in the exact time that you think you're going to be there. So maybe it's like 12 o'clock. You could put in there 12 o'clock instead of the time. So again, edit it. Next, if this time doesn't work and we need to reschedule, I understand. Please let me know and I will work around your schedule. Sorry again for the inconvenience. I hope to see you soon. Thank you. And then your name, and then your pronouns would be included with your name as well. You also want to look at how this is formatted. You'll notice that hi are on a separate line. Then your body of your paragraph or your kind of introduction are on a different line altogether. And then your closing and your signature are again on different lines. This is how your email should look. It shouldn't be all on the same line. You want to make sure that it's broken up. This is really important when writing an email to your professor because it just makes it seem more professional and that you know how to write a proper email. So, again, pay attention to the lines that your content is on. Now, we have gone over all the content we need to for this particular tutorial and lesson. Now, in our next video, we're going to look at an example of how to set up an email in Outlook. So, as I just showed you in this one, we talked about the different lines and how you need to space it out correctly. Now, we're going to actually practice it in our next video. I hope that this video was helpful to you. Please come back and reference it if you need, and let's go ahead and move on to the next video.